On this episode of Draft Room, we have UX designers Davis Godwin and Joe Davis.
Joe Davis, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, gentlemen.
Hey, cheers.
Happy to be here. Gotcha. I missed you.
There we go.
All right, so thankful that you guys are here. I would love to just kind of explore how you got into the design industry, what brought you there, and then how you got to where you currently are.
Okay. Say that again.
Basically, I just love to hear. If it's easy to start this way, if it's easier to say like, what did you study, and then what was your first job, and then how did you end up all the way to your current title?
Okay, yeah. So for me, industrial design. Went to Auburn for industrial design. Started actually in video games because of a friend kind of making a suggestion, and went from there and went through a layoff period and ended up in the DoD world and just kind of trickled out from there.
So when I had just started the studio like years ago, like almost 3 years ago, I was just seeing you at Honest all the time.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting down with you one time, not really knowing exactly my direction, and you told me a story about you getting this job and the rigor that it took for you to get there. And I would love for listeners, just if you wouldn't mind, to like give a brief retelling of that.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So like I said, started in industrial design. My first job was actually internship after college, and it was supposed to last a couple months. It lasted 3 or 4 months. They were trying to keep me on, but their funding just kind of ran out, and just turned out that there was a game studio just a few doors down, and that was really what I wanted to do. I'd had a friend in college kind of say, "Hey, I've seen some of your sketches and stuff, and I've seen this other industrial designer, Fing Zhu, that does video game stuff. Maybe you should think about that." And so there was this company a couple doors down called Mutable Realms, and I went over to talk to him, and it just so happened that their concept artist that they had was quitting. He was a phenomenal guy, but he was going to Sony, and they were going to need a guy, but they weren't certain that I was the guy.
Sure.
His style was very realistic. Mine was more cartoonish, and I was like, no. I think I can convince you. And I was doing a waiting job after I'd gotten laid off, and every day after the job was over, I just showed up at their front door and sat at the waiting table in their like lobby,
Like a homeless person.
Like a homeless person, and just did
just loitering
like D&D drawings
every
because
day.
it was a D&D game, and
Nice.
just kept doing drawings. And eventually, after a week or two, the game designer, kind of slipped me a list and was like, "I like what you're doing. Just keep going." And it took like another 2 weeks, and finally it was Halloween, the vice president came out and was like, "All right, I've kind of looked up kind of what you should be making. Let's give you an offer." And so that's how I ended up starting to do video games. Yeah. But it took about a month of just if they didn't lock the door, I was going to come in and just kind of draw, just quietly draw. Yeah.
So
See, kids, it's persistence.
That's right. That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
And
being
free work.
Super annoying.
Free work. Yeah. But yeah.
Okay. Very cool. Okay, Joe, tell me.
Yeah, so I started life as a mechanical engineering major because that's what my family did, and I don't know. I wanted to pursue art. Photography is my first love, so I was doing that, but I didn't really need school for that. So it's like, well, how can I make money? Mechanical engineering. Turns out I hated it deeply, so I did that for 2.5 years and decided I couldn't do that anymore. And there was a program, because I'm old, that was right when sort of the web technology was starting to reach a little bit of critical mass. So my school had this cognate design program where you could take a lot of art studio, like graphic design and art studio classes, combine that with IT classes and some low-level programming classes. And that was this weird cognate major that they cobbled together. And so I went and did that. And then out of school, I did a couple internships. And then I wound up working on this kind of small gaming project where they needed 3D modeling and animation. So that was fascinating. So learned to do that, did that for a few years. And then Davis actually joined that team after Immutable Realms. That's where I met Davis. Worked through that, had a lot of fun.
Yep.
Doing environment design, that kind of thing, object design for whatever. That was a lot of fun. But then an old professor of mine, he had gotten into UX and recruited me over to a company called Teledyne Brown. They were working on, and that was my first real intro into a real DoD project.
Okay.
They were working on modernization of the Patriot missile system, weirdly enough.
Oh.
But what they were trying to do is make it more human usable. Like, this thing looked like something out of Apollo 13. Just had this round green CRT screen.
Okay.
And like literal physical push buttons.
Yikes.
And I thought it was a joke the first time they showed it to me. So I was like,
Wow.
no, where's the real and cool thing
Wow.
that defends our country or whatever.
Yeah, it certainly couldn't be this, right?
Yeah. I mean, and it is, the technology's cool, but, so we were modernizing that UI. And so that was, I had done a little bit of UI on the gaming project, and I thought it was cool.
Sure.
And so I started learning about UX at that point. It was early in its, kind of being used in the vernacular of software development. So there was a whole learning curve and education curve, and then went from there. Like I said, went off and worked at a startup for a while.
Yep.
We worked on a lot of industrial applications there, trying to help people understand how their factory was doing, these giant factories. Then we had a project where Amazon has these huge warehouses that have like 10,000 lights across a 1 million square foot facility, and they wanted to control that from an iPad. And
Okay.
so we did that. We ended
Wow,
up
that's
selling that solution to Target as well. And so that project was great, but the company died. And
Okay.
then I wound up kind of coming back to Northrop Grumman
Yeah.
for a second time. And now we're building a team there.
Yeah. Okay. So you've used this word a few times, UX UI, and that's
Yes.
that's at least in part both of your titles. What is that?
You want-
I mean, it's user experience, user interface.
Yep.
User experience is just about, how it feels when you use something.
Okay.
As a broad term, but it's about a lot of little things that get you the right feel and the right way of interacting with something that makes it its most usable, I guess is a way of saying it.
Okay. Yeah, that felt really comprehensive. So one of the main things with the podcast that we're trying to work on is bridging the gap between industries.
Yeah.
It's design is everywhere in all things.
Everything.
Yeah, I mean, because it must be, right? One of the things that I was really interested to hear for both of you guys, especially because you came from such different beginning careers, right? Beginning of your careers, very different. What principles, maybe even engineering, from design were applicable in the beginning of your career? So maybe that's game character development, right? What principles of design principles maybe in engineering, your 2-year stint, now inform parts of what you currently do?
I mean,
for me, the overarching one is, well, first is a focus on the human.
Okay.
That human focus is something that's been a driver for everything I've done. I love how people use things and learning how people use things and learning the jobs that they do, really getting into their heads and designing a tool to fit that. But the overarching principle, I think, for me, is simplicity, and that goes back to mechanical engineering as well.
Yeah.
The fewer gates a thing has to pass through, the more simple and straightforward a solution can be, the better in the end.
What's a gate? What do you mean?
So if there are too many, it has to do this, and then this, and then this.
Uh-huh.
If there are too many moving parts,
Yep.
you want the fewest moving parts possible.
Yep.
Whether it be a piece of graphic design or
Sure.
or a UI
Yeah, yeah.
or a piece of mechanical equipment like the tripods that are sitting
Right.
over there.
Right. Sure.
So that's for me the one driving principle that spans across everything.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sick.
that's interesting. It's similar on like the web world. If you're looking for higher conversion rates for say a form or something, the less entries you have to make in that form, the higher percentage of conversion you have. It seems like the principles sort of translate there very similar, right?
100%.
Yeah,
A conversation that I have with clients a lot is like, how little information can you get away with?
yeah,
Yes.
right.
Yes.
Yeah,
You know?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
And that
Yeah.
turns out to be harder than just putting everything on screen.
yeah. I'm interested here. Like, so normal UX UI might be involved in clients in the out world, and your demo for that could be all over the place. Maybe for DoD, is that a little more narrowed down? You're really looking for user experience for what? Military purpose? Like that to me is a different demo than your sort of bigger. So how's that been to try to get your hands around and design for specific types of people that are within, government and military and defense and stuff?
I think it's easier in some ways because the diversity is kind of simplified to a degree. Like with the people we work with, you can't have color blindness. So I don't have to worry about that.
ADA stuff doesn't come
Yeah.
in quite as much, right?
Doesn't come in as much. So you don't have to, don't have to
yeah,
worry
yeah.
about that. So, like from that perspective, it's easier from the fact that, they're trained in a certain way to kind of think in a certain way. So we just have to kind of understand that method, but then backtrack kind of those homegrown pieces that kind of happen in the mix of like, yeah, this is the way we were trained and this is the way we do things, but we also know that there's this other thing. And maybe it's, like we've talked about, like a grease pencil on the screen that they have to make a little bark or something. We look for those nuances of little things that they're having to do to try to help the machine out. And once we can start to backtrack those things, it makes it easier on us. But we get this, especially for what we're doing right now, is this very kind of smaller group of things where we don't have to be as nearly diverse about how we think about it.
Well, so you said it. I'm keying in. I don't know if this is what you were going to ask about, but
Is it analog here we're about to talk about? How
Yeah.
a grease
Yeah.
pencil is still
Yeah, the grease
involved
pencil-
in the
Yeah.
defense of our country?
Right. And
I love it.
Yeah. Well, and it's like a grease pencil or even just like a little note. I'm going to make a little note right here.
Yeah.
Well, why does that note not shouldn't that be on the screen?
Sure.
Should that be shareable?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like little things like that you have to.
How
that
you
we start to question.
documenting that grease pencil
Right.
later on?
So
Right.
interesting.
Well, and that comes from understanding the high stakes of what they're doing. They will employ, the soldiers are very inventive. They will employ any method they need to get their job done because they believe in their job, and often their job is high stakes. So if it requires marking on the screen with a grease pencil or sticking a sticky note to it or whatever other little modification they make to their environment, they'll do it if the tool isn't delivering that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is just really interesting. To me, it again speaks to the umbrella term of UX. It's all encompassing. Like
Yes.
you're having to encompass the nuances of a particular person who does things a certain way, but you still have to take into account because everything's so high stake, and that some of these people are in there, and you have to accommodate for that. That's really interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how are you adjusting for? I guess I'm not understanding how are you seeing these field changes? Like, how is that making its way around to you? Because what I'm hearing, as long as I'm understanding this correctly, is you guys are designing a product, a user interface, ultimately, right? And that's getting used. That's getting actually used pragmatically. And then you're trying to discern what all can we add to this to make it as effective or take away from it to make it more effective. So how is it that you know about the grease pencil, Mark, first of all?
Do they work for Big Brother? What are you talking about? They all know everything. They're everywhere. Since 1984, man.
Sorry, I wish it were true.
No,
I don't actually wish that were true.
And we get to go have like some user experience events.
Sure.
Yeah, so
Okay.
we actually get to go see these guys. And,
Sure.
And talk to them, and we've actually developed a fairly decent relationship with them. Yeah.
Well, and to me, that is the best part about UX design is it's carried me and Davis over our careers to some really cool places. I've got to visit, enormous factories that people don't get to see that are doing all kinds of incredible stuff. I've gotten to go, and be in FAA control towers at major airports and watch how those guys do their very high stakes job, and that's amazing. And we've been to military bases in some cases or whatever. But at the end of the day, you're trying to excuse me, you're always grappling with how is this human in this space doing a job, and what job are they doing, and what forces affect them. Like you said, the all-encompassing thing. How does their environment affect them? How does their mindset affect them? How does their tool set affect them? How does even their living conditions affect them? Some of our users right now they sit up in Alaska and they're very isolated. They went through a hell of a time during COVID, being intensely isolated from their families and all their support structures. So that plays into how they do their job as well, you know. So I think I went down a rabbit hole there, but again, I always like to bring it back to understanding the human and how they're functioning in their job.
Yeah, well, I think we're here for the rabbit holes,
Yeah.
for sure. One of the things that you keep saying is high stakes, and I guess in some cases that also means high stress environments. Is that it can mean that? How are you guys like adjusting? Like, what does it mean practically? I hear you saying this conceptually. Well, we're working for high stakes design, right? But what is that like practically? What changes? How does that change what you're actually doing in the way that you design?
I mean, you just have to think about cognitive load a lot. Like, how much information are they processing at once? And can you find ways to minimize that, or can you find ways to streamline like an activity from one thing to another, that workflow, so that they know the next step without having to process the next step. They just kind of can move to it. It's little things like that. Little things like taking away the analog piece of paper,
Sure.
so they don't have to move their eyes off the screen. They can keep themselves engaged. Little things. Yeah.
Well, and things like, basic design things become really important. Visual hierarchy becomes extremely important. White space becomes extremely important. Balance is very important. Contrast, all of those things that we learn in school actually have high application here, because, like you said, you're trying to give them something that they can scan, understand the situation rapidly, and not have to spend. You don't want their brain power spent on the tool. You want the brain power spent on the job they're trying to do.
Sure.
And so that's the practical side.
I think that one thing that you brought to me that resonated when we first started this project was right data, right place, right time.
Yeah.
Right data, right place, right time.
Yeah. So no data on screen that doesn't need to be there until it needs to be there. And when it is there, it has to be the right piece.
Have you guys, I'm sure this might be the case, but have you done some of that user testing and come back, and do you have any stories around where an adjustment you made because of intuition that you guys had actually made a difference and was like the thing that made the difference? Or have you had some preconceived notions about some of your designs completely demolished because of when it meets real world? You have any stories around any of that?
I mean, so the thing we're doing right now, we haven't gotten to the full breadth of the user testing. But
it's going to save the world, right? I just want to make sure,
sure, 100%.
we're going down
Definitely.
that path, please.
Yeah.
All right.
100%.
Very good.
But we do get to kind of show some of our concepts and our visual ideas to them, and some of them get the first notion that this project had immediately burnt to the ground. It was it was an immediate just no. It was just that sometimes when things are kind of put together, the idea that starts on a project, you think it's the right thing, but it's just not. You just don't know the information you don't know.
Sure.
And once we started to get a little bit of information, it was an instant. Okay, we've got to look at this all over again and think about how we're going to approach it. Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, I would say usability testing, user testing always requires you just leave the ego very far away.
Very far away.
Because they will.
Well, I think it does it for you.
Yes.
It just
Yes.
crushes.
If you go in with an ego, it will be destroyed.
Whether
Yeah,
you
it will
leave
be
it far away
destroyed.
or not, it
Yeah,
ends far
exactly.
away.
One story I have is from the industrial application that I helped build. The demographic that runs these factories, the large factories that produce almost everything, often skews a little older because it takes a long time to understand how these places work. They're like giant organisms, is what I've found out. And so the people who run them tend to skew a bit older. They also, despite being involved with a technology, they have a very narrow band of technology that they're involved with. And so one of the applications we built was like taking in sensor data from all kinds of power sensors to understand how, a factory's using power for environmental concerns and just for savings concerns. And so we built a tool that would allow, someone to do that. And one of the first guys I tested with turns out he was absolutely terrified of technology in general, and he had a complete emotional meltdown at what we had presented him and had to walk away.
Oh my goodness.
You broke him?
I broke him. Yeah. And so that required a redesign, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure.
But we
Holy
came back
smokes.
later, and we had a more successful test with him and others. So, but yeah, you can break people if you're not careful. He was
Okay.
just overwhelmed by his own, just sort of innate fear of doing something wrong. But we clearly didn't allay those fears with what we had presented in the tool set. So.
Yeah, I wonder if it goes back to your right data, right place, right time, is it?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
maybe you did all those things too much.
Maybe. Or maybe we didn't do them well enough. Yeah. So, yeah, that was the story when I emotionally broke a user. So.
That's like a really good point, though. The when you are trying to get the right data, right time, right place, like there's sometimes that chunk of data that people use as like a little warm fuzzy blanket
Yes.
that doesn't actually mean like what they think it means, but it's just a nice little way of keeping themselves feeling like they know what's going on.
Like this is a safe place.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's like a window. You don't necessarily need a window in your office, but it makes you feel better to look
Yeah.
outside.
Interesting.
Well, yeah, that leads me to one other question. The question that I think keeps coming up with a lot of designers now around AI, right? So a lot of your work is dealing with that human element. Do you guys predict a future where that's not going to be so prevalent, where or is there a time where you feel like UX won't be as needed in some of these situations because they're going to be handled by things that do not have the human element in them, where they don't have grease pencils, they're not going to be broken by so much data, and the right time, right place, right data could be consumed 1,000 times more than a person can, right? So what are your thoughts on AI in general around those type of questions?
I always see AI, and again, I come from a very human-centric perspective. I like humans, and I think we're good for stuff. I think sometimes there's a perspective on AI that it will replace humans, and obviously there's terrifying futures that we could maybe make that happen. But I always see AI as an augmenting factor. It goes to that thing of where do you want the human's cognitive load to be? AI is great at, mushing together a ton of information and spitting out an answer or a possible answer or a range of possibilities even. It can do analysis more quickly than we can, obviously. But for specifically defense or any other critical, infrastructure kind of thing like air traffic control or any of those kind of mission critical type things, you want that human who has intuition and hopefully morality and ethics and all of these things underlying it. So you want the tool to be able to surface some possibilities or do analysis, but ultimately there's that human in that loop who maybe doesn't spend his cognitive load on that and instead is looking at the situation and making an informed decision or more informed decision.
Sure.
So that's my best hope for AI.
Right.
We're all going to be dealing with lots of questions about how AI affects design and products and how we live, for sure. That's an obvious statement.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely making it faster. Like the conceptual portion of it can be much, much faster.
That's another thing.
But, and this is something we've talked about a lot, is I think as designers, we're going to become better curators of those designs. So we can do a lot more faster and we can see things, but good is still kind of relative to the moment in time.
Okay.
Oh.
Right? So, a design in the 50s versus a design in the 60s, I mean, they're both good designs, but if you wear something in the 60s that was made in the 50s, they might make fun of you for it. And so, that's kind of I think that element that doesn't show up when we start talking about AI a lot.
Got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the principles are always the same.
Always the same.
And AI will always be exceptional at recognizing those principles,
Yeah.
right? But there's this factor that maybe demands some humanity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think there's a little point there too that no matter what we're talking about, the end product is to serve humans in some form or fashion.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
Sure.
never gonna.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
never not
It's not
gonna
going
be the
anywhere.
case.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
that's never not the case, then maybe there's always a place for the humans on the production side of it, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I hope you're right.
hopefully, that's in a non-Terminator scenario,
Right,
right?
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think Davis is exactly right on the production side. We may be pushing pixels less. Some people enjoy pushing pixels, other people don't. But maybe it's a case where we define, a bunch of basic elements and then ask the AI to give us a range of possibilities. And it can do that really fast.
Yeah.
Whereas I might spend an afternoon putting together 3 different concepts. It could do it, give me 5 or
Sure.
10, but
Right.
we end up curating. And curating is not a bad place to be.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really what we do anyway.
Mhm.
I mean, because designs happen over and over and over again,
Yep.
and you just are good at picking the right one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe in iteration, and it will
Yeah.
let you iterate much more quickly.
quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, this has been a joy.
Yeah.
Seriously, thanks for coming and helping us understand a little bit more about the unity between all the things that we all do and letting us in at least a little bit into the details of what you guys are up to. I would love to maybe have you guys on some other time as you finish projects.
Yeah, anytime.
And just update us on what other ethical and actual qualms you've had to deal with.
There's a whole conversation we can have on ethics.
Yeah, and I think I really
Yeah.
would love that.
Yeah.
I want to summarize here. I love the fact that 2 video game designers are now protecting the world. That there's something
At least try.
At least right.
funny about it, but also reassuring and also
Yes.
scary. All in one ball. So
That's
Absolutely.
it's pretty great.
Well, thanks, gentlemen. Seriously.
Thank
Cheers.
you, guys.
Guys,
Cheers,
thanks
thank you.
so much for
Yes,
coming in. I
absolutely.
really appreciate it.
We enjoyed it. Or I enjoyed it. I can't speak for
Absolutely.
you.
I did as well.